Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So the Visa Bulletin was released today for March 2020 interviews, and although the numbers were pretty good, obviously some people choose to look at the glass half empty all the time, and think about things in a negative way. And if you're that way concerned, or if you're in Asia, for example, you're probably worrying about this 12,500 number. The visa bulletin for Asia went up from 12,000 to 12,500. Actually, most of the selectees who are being handled at the moment are in Nepal and in Iran, and Nepal had a pretty good jump. And if you want to talk about people who've got something to be concerned about, then talk to the selectees from Iran, because they are, they like selectees from Yemen. They are in a pretty tough spot with the travel ban, etc. So, so you know, try and count your blessings where you can, people. Please try and look at the positive side of life in general. But I do understand that people are concerned, and so as I've done for the last couple of months, I thought I'd run through the numbers and explain a little bit more for the people that are interested about what's going on exactly. So these are the numbers that were released today, and what I've done is I've plotted that onto a spreadsheet, which I've been doing for the last few months. I haven't shown this spreadsheet before, but this is something that anybody could do. You just need a little bit of common sense looking at the numbers. So what I've done is I've taken the 6 months we've had so far, and the number that the VB has been released to in each of those months, and calculated how many cases were current after each VB, after each visa bulletin, right? And so this is a cumulative effect. This is let's say we're looking at Africa. There are 20,433 cases overall, and that's an interesting, actually, slight difference number there. But 20,400 cases overall, and that are in the SEAC data file. And the first VB was 2,500. 2,720 cases were made current, right? And we know that now because of the SEAC data that we've had since the beginning of January. After the 5,600 number, then 1,707 cases were current. And after the 12,000 number that we saw for December interviews, 3,711 cases were current. So the 3,711 includes the 1,707 and the 724. Okay, this is a cumulative number month to month. Okay, so in each of those months, I've plotted here the visa bulletin number per region, the number of cases that became current as a result, and the percentage of the overall number of cases that there are in that region. Okay, in other words, this 724 represents 3.54% of the overall number of cases. And if you look at this data from month to month, you get an idea of how the visa bulletin progression really is. And why do we have to look at it this way? Well, you can't just think about the numbers this year. You have to consider not only the numbers, but also the amount of holes there are in the cases. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look at that. So we've got the data from Zarthisius, which is the 2020 SEAC data. And if we look at some of these regions, we can see that in AF region, for example, the blue color here represents the number of holes there are in each 1,000 cases. So from 3,000 to 4,000, there's our 3,000 to 4,000 is there. There's our range. The blue number shows that we've got 66% holes, so that's 668 cases out of 1,000 cases are holes. There's no case number there. And then there's some issued, there's some ready, there's in transit, but in other words, it's the other 33.2%. are real cases that are in some sort of status, either ready or at MVC, not ready yet. Those sort of statuses, right? So that's holes for you. Now, if we look at Africa, you can see that the holes numbers stay fairly consistent with a slight tailing off towards the end. In Europe, there is a slightly higher density to start with, up until, let's say, 10,000 or so, and then the case numbers go down to a slightly lower range. So there's obviously some sort of cut-off. There's one country that is cut off at that point. We've talked about this before. In Asia, there's a much more easy to see situation here. So the full number range is 31,000, but at about 12,000, there's a big drop in numbers, and then at around about 14,500, 15,000, there's another drop in numbers. And essentially what's happened there is that Iran is capped out there at 12,000, and Nepal is capped out at 14,500 or so, nearly 15,000. So that's selectees. I'm not talking about final numbers. I know I'm going to have someone say, "Oh, you're saying that there's no one above 14,500 for Nepal." I'm not saying that. I'm saying these are the highest numbers that were issued to as selectees in those ranges. Now, I am aware that there's a couple of people who have said they've heard of cases at 17 and 18,000 in Nepal. I know there is such a thing as what we would call outliers. There might be the occasional case, but in general, I think those things are misunderstanding. It's someone living in Nepal who actually is chargeable to some other area. And something along those lines. They're not actually charging to Nepal. Nepal is cut off, as far as I'm concerned, by about 15,000, and Iran is cut off by about 12,000. So that's how that looks in Asia. South America is fairly consistent across the number range up to case number 4,000, and Oceania again is fairly consistent. These sort of ups and downs are statistically, sort of not important. That's pretty much a straight line until the end of the range. Okay, so that's a look at the holes. So now you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about holes, right? Hopefully you've read my articles and you've watched my videos and you understand what holes are and why they come. So I'm not going to explain that again now. So back to our spreadsheet. And we can see therefore how many cases are current in each of the months, right? Now let's just have a look at this. Africa has had now, in the 6 months, first of all started at 3.5%. By the second month was at 8.5% almost, 18% by the third month, 28.8%, nearly 29% there by January interviews, and 38%. And then in this visa bulletin, 31,500 means that there are 9,600 cases that are now current under that number. Now I'm ignoring the fact that there is a separate number for Egypt. And statistically, it doesn't really matter at this point. But so for Africa, I'm taking it as every case under this number is current. So that's 47% of the case numbers are current. 47%, almost 50% after 6 months. Actually, considering we had a very slow start, that's pretty good. Nobody should be concerned about that. I've mentioned in a previous video that most of the activity in the visa, in the DV lottery process, is going to happen in February, March, April, May, June, those sort of months. That's when the majority of cases are actually being interviewed and issued, etc. There are almost always, in every lottery year that I can remember, there are more cases issued, there are more cases interviewed, there's more activity in the second 6 months of the year than there would have been in the first 6 months of the year. So to be at the halfway point at month 6 is actually pretty good news. And, that's pretty much in line with where I thought we'd be. And I'm pretty comfortable with Africa's progress. The progress doesn't necessarily mean we can get to the very end, but it shows that it's kind of tracking towards where we'd expect, right? So it doesn't say anything about they can reach the final number. It's more a question of whether they're getting behind in the interviews or not. All right. So looking at Asia, now as I just showed, Asia is a slightly different picture. I've put the numbers in here, but they're not really trustworthy because there are two countries which are cut off under this range, and so these numbers don't really reflect the correct number of cases which are current at the moment. And Asia is a totally different case anyway, and I'm going to explain Asia in more detail later on in this video. I'm going to dedicate some time to explain Asia in particular. So if you're interested in Asia, hold on to your horses and stay tuned to the video, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail later on. In EU, as I mentioned in a previous video, I was really looking for March and April interviews to have a decent bump, and we certainly got it today for EU. So up until last month, after 5 months, the visa bulletin number was sitting at 14,000, and today it grew by 7,000. So you could say it's half the progress in 1 month. Looking at it from a case number point of view, we went from nearly 31% of the cases were current at the end of last month, and now nearly 44%, so a pretty decent jump this month. Now, as I mentioned before, in EU we can see that there is a slightly higher number range, a bigger density or a more dense concentration of cases in the numbers up until about 9,000, 10,000 I think it might be. And so as the density drops, numbers after 10,000 reveal less cases per thousand, right? So, that's why the 50% increase is not 50% more. It's not why we're not at 46%. We haven't gone up by half of this again. It's gone up by slightly lower than that. Now, 43% after 6 months, yeah, it's not quite where we would like it to be, but it's not too bad either. It's a pretty big jump today. I expect next month to also have a fairly big jump. There is always a chance when they make a lot of new cases current that there'll be a sort of a delay or a backlog effect caused by those current cases. Up to now, with the case number being held to 14,000, I don't think there were too many backlog cases for Europe, where we've got large numbers of people who are waiting who have been current for a while and perhaps even submitted their DS260N documents earlier, but we're finding that they were not being made, they were not being scheduled. Those cases, backlog cases, shouldn't really be an issue in the first 14,000 numbers because we've had a fairly slow progression. And so this month, the 7,000 case numbers, certainly most of the interviews will go to that group of new cases that have just been made newly current. And there is a chance that we'll have a little bit of backlog overflow into next month, reducing the increase to a number less than 7,000. But I would be hopeful of seeing at least 5,000 or 6,000 increase next month. So we'd see EU go to 26,000, something like that, 27, or maybe 28,000. That's certainly possible again next month. So let's hope for that. Oceania, if anybody's whining from Oceania, you need to get a grip of yourself, because nobody should be complaining about how Oceania is going. 75% of the cases are already current now after today's visa bulletin. We only have 211 cases remaining out of the whole number range that are not current. So 654 cases are current, 211 are left. So, it's very clear that Oceania is tracking very fast. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw Oceania going current in May. April might be another decent size increase and then just go current in May. And at that point, the only remaining activity will be from people that submit their forms late, and those cases would be interviewed in June and July and August and September. But Oceania has moved very, very rapidly. South America. South America is a bit of a confusing and sadder case in a way. It's not increasing as it should be. It's quite confusing to know why they're doing this. I don't have a good answer for you. For South America, there is a lot of activity, I think, in the certain ranges for Oceania, for South America. But the bottom line is that after 6 months, only 32% of the cases are actually current. There are far more cases left waiting to become current. And we really need to see a pretty big bump next month. Otherwise, we're going to get into a situation where there are not enough remaining interview slots over the remaining few months for them to reach the end of the numbers, even if that were mathematically possible to do so. So I do think, and I've said in previous videos and previous articles, there is a bit of a risk for high case numbers in South America. So if your case number is above about 3,000, there is somewhat of a risk. I do believe we're going to get, to, probably 3,000 and above. But there is certainly some risk above that. Both mathematically there's some risk, and also from the point of view of how the visa bulletin itself is moving. This last column does show the remaining cases as best as I can figure it out. And so you can see, where we stand in terms of remaining cases. Now, I promised to give a little bit more explanation on Asia. So let's get into that a little bit. I'm hoping that most people have understood this chart and have taken, you can freeze the frame and you understand the chart. And so, you can take some time to have a look at these numbers and digest it for yourself in whatever region you're interested in. But for Asia, there's a different calculation going on. So I need to explain that a little bit. So, okay, let's firstly have a look at the Asia numbers here. We'll take that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of this. Actually, I took a screenshot of that. Good. Already have a screenshot of that, which is exactly the same thing that we're looking at there, right? That's the Asia numbers. Now, in Asia, there are, as I've mentioned, a couple of sort of breakpoints. There's a density level at about 50%, right? Looks like at about 50%. There's then a cliff where Iran hits a brick wall. There are no more Iran selectees after that point. And that's the 12,000 range, right? And so at that point, Iran gets stopped. And there's a continuation, and this section here shows that Nepal continued at that point. And then there's a third level, which is the rest of Asia for the remainder of the year. Now what I can do is I can draw lines, just to make that a little bit clearer, I can draw some lines on here and show you what I mean by that. So there's one line. Then the next line would be drawn at about that level, right? The next line would be about here. Okay, so what does this mean? If we chunk each of the cases up, so roughly 50% of the cases per 1,000, so 500 cases out of each 1,000 are real cases, and roughly 500 cases out of each 1,000 are holes to begin with. And this, we're saying, is, beg pardon, come on. This is Iran, right? That's Iran. Then we've got Nepal. Which is there. And then we've got the rest of Asia. Okay, so we've got the rest of Asia at that point. Okay, so essentially this range, or this percentage of numbers, I'm saying all the way through the range is cases outside of Nepal and Iran. So I'm calling that the rest of Asia, right? This number of cases in that range, in that box that I've drawn there, is Nepalese cases. Whatever range that's roughly the Nepal cases. And Iran is that chunk of cases, right? So I'm saying that, roughly speaking, there's almost a third distribution between Iran, Nepal, and the rest of Asia. That's pretty much how that looks. Okay. Now you might be saying, yeah, but this is just graphics, just a visualization. How can I prove that a little bit better? So I thought, okay, I'll explain to you mathematically why that's the case. This is slightly difficult to understand, so if you're not good with numbers, you're not going to understand this very well. But hopefully some of you will get it. So Asia has a total number of selectees of 15,941 selectees. When we're talking about those selectees, that's principal selectees and derivatives, right? And there are, if we look at the visa bulletin for August, we can see that Iran has 4,101, Nepal has 3,696, right? And Yemen has 550 as well. I'm just going to mention Yemen for a moment. But so between Iran, Nepal, and Yemen, there are 550s, 3,600, and 4,100. The people most affected by the travel ban are the Iranians and the Yemenis. So around about 4,500 people are under the travel ban, right? Now, those people are 4,500 people in this group. So there's about 11,500 people or 11,300 people that are not affected too badly from the travel ban. But all the Iranians and the Yemenis, they're all going to struggle getting their visas. Very, very few of them will be approved, which is sad and horrific, frankly, but President Trump and his crew are to blame for that. So, essentially, that's the distribution of cases. So, if 4,101 cases are Iranian, of these 15,900 cases, and 3,696 are Nepalese, then the rest of Asia is 8,100 cases, including Yemenis, right? And as a percentage, if you want to look at it this way, roughly 25%, 25.7% of the Asia cases are Iranian, 23% are Nepalese, and 51% are rest of Asia. Okay, so if we look at the case numbers, we know there are 9,053 case numbers. That's individual cases. So all of these people are 15,900 people are distributed amongst 9,000 cases. So if we assume the distribution is equal between these countries, which it isn't, but if we assume that and apply the percentage distribution, then we would see something like 2,300 cases going to Iran, nearly 2,100 cases going to Nepal, and 4,600 cases being the rest of Asia. Okay, we know the distribution cuts off for Iran at around about 12,000. By 15,000, Nepal is cut off, and the rest of Asia has case numbers up to 31,000. So if we divide the number of cases by the number of thousands that the individual country is in, we can figure out how many cases per thousand there are for each of these countries. I'll call them countries. Rest of Asia isn't a country, but these groupings, right? And so by applying that formula, we can do a little mathematical formula, divide 4625 by 31, and that would give you 149 cases per 1,000, or 15%. Nepal would give you, same sum, same formula there, gives you 14% for Nepal, and 19.4% for Iran. Now, does that work? Well, that gives us a total of 483, so 48.3%. Does that align with my numbering there? Yes, it does. So I said that the top line would be at about 50%. Well, it's actually mathematically I'm calculating it at around about 48.3%, right? And I drew another line there in roughly a third, and another line there roughly a third, etc. And so this first chunk is 15%, that's 14%, and then that's the Iranian percentage. So all I'm saying is that I can prove mathematically what I can also show graphically using the SEAC data from Xarthisius, right? That's what that means. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate there. So I'm sure of these numbers, right? Now, what that then means is if we look at our picture again, we can see that after Nepal gets limited, there'll be a continuation of for the rest of Asia of around 15%, right? And only 150 cases per 1,000. So for each 1,000 they make available for interview through the visa bulletin, another 150 cases will be I messed that up. Another 150 cases will be available, right? Okay. So rest of Asia. How did I manage to do that? I just have to now say okay, I guess. All right. So So that hopefully that's making sense to you all. Now, Iranian cases, they'll be slowed down and they'll distribute that workload over the full 12 months. For Iran, possibly they'll try and cut off a little bit earlier, because frankly, Iranian cases, if they have a chance of going through, they need to be interviewed a little bit earlier than other cases because they need more time to pass through background checks, etc. And it's already getting to the point, frankly, that if you're an Iranian selectee and you're going for your interview, even if you can get through the travel ban, even if you've got a way to get right through the travel ban, there's a high chance that you'll need a background check which will take longer than there is remaining in the year. And so the risk for Iranian selectees and Iranian cases is very high. The chance of getting approved is very low, other than the cases where perhaps people already live in the USA and they're adjusting status, or they're living in Canada, some of the well-known ways around the travel ban, right? Nepal, similarly, this block of selectees, the 3,696 people that are in Nepal, that processing will be spread over the full 12 months, right? So for the rest of Asia, we can pretty reliably say, okay, we can almost talk about that separately to Nepal and Iran, and just talk about the progress that will be made over a period of time for Iran. So, for the rest of Asia. So, we're at around about this point now. We're at around about 12,000 for the rest of Asia. And so now, from this point onwards, as Nepal and Iran, continue their processing at their own pace, the rest of Asia just needs to move on, within its 150 cases per 1,000 for the remaining time. And there's about 18,000 case number, or 18,000 numbers left, 18,000, thousands, I should say, left. And if we take that number, by the way, if we take 18,000, actually it would be 19,000. 19,000. So there's 19,000 times 150 cases. So, oh dear me, 19,000 times 150 cases. There should be, what am I doing that? Why can I not do math? It's too late at night. 19 times 150 is what I should be doing. 2850. So there's something like 2850 cases and selectees left. That are rest of Asia, right? So hold that thought. You've got that idea. Hopefully, you're understanding that, right? Now, if we then look back at the spreadsheet where we had all the numbers there, you can see that out of the remaining cases, that number is obviously clearly not correct. It's a problem. But that's because the cases under 12,500 are not all current, because if you're in Iran or if you're in Nepal, you're under a different number. So actually there's less cases have been made current at this point, and there are more cases remaining than that number would suggest. But we know there are about 2,800 cases remaining for the rest of Asia. Okay, so that's one way to look at it in terms of what's the progress, right? The other way to look at things is, what are my chances of getting current, and are there enough visas available? So let's say the quota for Asia as a whole is something like 9,000, right? It's about that, 9,000 in this year. That's 9,000 of the 55,000 visas that are available, right? Nepal is going to max out, and it's going to get, it's 3,800 cases, about that, right? So actually, the full max would be 3,850. It's going to get that, right, or pretty close to it. They'll probably stop at something like 3,700 or 3,800. They won't go to 3,850. They won't go to the exact number. So it'll stop a little bit earlier than that. But let's say they took the whole 3,850. For Iran, there would be maybe 200 cases, right? And in Yemen, there's going to be almost no cases, right? Maybe, I don't know, 50 people from Yemen get their approvals out of the 550, which is horrific, but there you go. So from the 9,000, we're going to allocate something like 4,100 cases to Nepal, Iran, and Yemen, right? And the rest of Asia has something like 5,000 cases, 5,000 visas left, right? So we know the rest of Asia minus Yemen is about 7,500 cases. So if we do a little bit of math here, we've got 7,500 selectees. Of those selectees, probably only about 60% will actually respond. So let's just be slightly pessimistic or optimistic, depending on how you want to look at it. Say 65% of those people respond. So 4,875 will want an interview, and of the 4,875, let's say that 90% get approved, right? There will be some refusals. Some people left on AP, but 10% refusals is a pretty high number, frankly. But we'll take that. So we say 4,875 times 0.9. Oops, 0.9. So the demand for visas is something like 4,387 visas, and the availability is something like 4,900. In other words, mathematically, there are enough visas to go around for the rest of Asia. There are enough visas remaining for everybody to get a visa, right? With an expectation that 65% respond. We'll just write that down so we're clear, and 90% approved, right? Now, those are pretty pretty dramatically. I mean, in previous years we haven't seen as many as 65 people respond, and we haven't seen as many as 90% approved. But we'll take those numbers, and and try and calculate it in a worst case scenario. So let's say 4,400 people want visas, and will be qualified, and there are 4,900 visas. Mathematically, there are enough. If obviously there has to be a situation where they schedule enough interviews, they don't leave all the work until too late, so they do have to move the visa bulletin each month, in line with what they need to do to get to the end of the 31,000. But really, if you're in Asia, outside of Nepal and Iran and Yemen, there should be a fairly clear understanding to everybody that there are enough visas to go around in this year's process. So you really don't have too much reason to be concerned. Could there be a final cap in place just before the end? Yeah, maybe. It's possible. But my gut reaction says that Asia should go current. For the rest of Asia, there'll probably be a cap in place for Nepal. Iran will get almost no visas, as I've predicted here, let's say 200 visas out of its whole thing, and Iran will get a few visas, etc. But that's roughly what I think is going to happen. So, please, if your case number is 21,000, 22,000, 23,000, honestly, you're wasting your time asking me if your case number is, say, if you're wasting my time and yours in asking that, because it's mathematically obvious, and just be patient, right? So if your case number is 31,000 something, okay, you've got a little bit of reason to be concerned and nervous. You could still go current. But you're going to have to wait and see, right? Same thing at 28,000, 29, 30,000. That's the range where I would expect there to be some nervousness from people, right? So that's roughly what I'm thinking. Hopefully that's clear to people on Asia. Okay, so between the two bits of information that I've been able to share there, the progression that we're seeing, and whether the numbers are in the right place or not for how the progress should be going, we're in pretty good shape. Asia should get current. The other regions have a mathematical calculation to them. Also, I'm not going to go into those tonight. It's fairly late here already, but you can see that we're at least tracking on the right sort of speed of visa bulletin to get to the end of the numbers, and with a little bit more acceleration in Europe, those four regions should be absolutely fine. South America is a concern. There are going to be, if we're not lucky, there will be a cap in place for South America, and either by a mathematical cap where they've reached the number of visas that they want to reach, or because they simply run out of time to schedule the cases. One way or the other, I think we're going to see some sort of problem in South America. Where it will happen exactly, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. It's too early to make dramatic predictions about South America at this point. We need to wait a couple more months at least before we've got more of an understanding of that situation. Okay, so I hope that was interesting and helpful to you. It's probably a long video. It's probably put some people to sleep, but hopefully that was interesting. So as ever, if you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed this one, click the like button. Please let me know you like it, and make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. Make sure you're watching out for any new videos that I can release, and make sure also that you're paying attention with what I'm saying on my blog at BritSimonSays.com. There's a lot of information there. And for the people that are waiting for May to come around, they obviously would not be waiting for the new visas, the new lottery, to be announced. This information might seem very detailed and uninteresting to you at this point, but believe me, once you're a selectee, these numbers will become a part of your life for a few months or a year while the whole progress goes through. So, hopefully, good luck to those people coming up in May, and hopefully you get low case numbers. But if you get a high case number, as people can tell you, it's a terrible waiting game that you have to play. So there you go. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But have a great day. Have a good weekend. It's a 3-day weekend here for me, so I'm going to enjoy that over the weekend, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye now.